Hello and welcome to part 3 of this 8 km City of London photo run. This section goes from London Bridge to St Paul's Cathedral through the city. You can see it starts very much where St Olaf's Church was, which is where we stopped, and it will come up and go across the bridge and it will continue to go north. Now when we do this run we'll have to do a dogleg because in this particular map the bridge is in its old position, but it was a straight road going north, and then when we get to Threadneedle Street we turn right and we're going to head along towards Cornhill, or Bank really, but this would have been the just starting of the financial centre by Thomas Gresham, and then we'll end up just north of St Paul's Cathedral. Now looking at the Victorian map we can see that the route is very much as we would run it today, and we can see the dogleg past the monument to the Great Fire of London, and we go out to Threadneedle Street and we can see that the Bank of England is still in place, as well as the Royal Exchange, and then we get to London Bridge and we can see that that is how London exists today. Looking at this from the Shard, we can look at the route, the area to look forward in terms of our turning. There's a biggest building which is 22 Bishopsgate. I think now we turn down Threadneedle Street just at that point, and then we head along that route and eventually come up following the dotted line all the way up to St Paul's Cathedral, and that will be along Cheapside. Okay, this is a quick diagrammatic view of the map again, and this is how it would actually look as we were running it. So we're coming up to the junction, we're just going to go back the way we came across the bridge, and again you could have started this and cut that other section out by just coming to this point where we came up and then turning right and just going along the front, and we're going to basically take the first turning on our right, which is going to bring us to Monument. This is the monument to the Great Fire of London, and it was built in 1671 and it stands at 202 feet tall, which is 202 feet from the place where the Fire of London started on Pudding Lane. Now let's give you some facts about the Fire of London. So it started in 1666. Between the 2nd and the 6th of September, it lasted for 4 days and destroyed about 70% of the City of London, really inside the walls of the city. About 13,000 homes were destroyed, as well as 87 churches, including St Paul's. So the monument was built to commemorate that. But interestingly, it was built as a zenith telescope, and the architects were Christopher Wren and Thomas Hook. An interesting fact about the monument is that more people died falling off the monument than were recorded to have died from the Fire of London itself. So there's only 6 people have died from falling off the very top of it before they put a barrier all the way around. So first example of health and safety. But the previous year was even worse for London, because the plague came back with a vengeance, and over 13,000 people died in that year. That's about 1/6 of the population. However, the fire did put an end to the plague, which was linked to both rats and fleas, both of which didn't survive or couldn't survive beyond the fire. Coming back to the monument, you might decide to go up the monument, which has many stairs, but you do get some good views of London, although they have been slightly spoilt with the number of new buildings that have come along the way. But that used to be one of the tallest places in London to get the views of the city. As we leave the monument, we pass the monument station on our left hand side and head up towards Gracechurch Street. At this junction, if we look to our left, we'll be heading west towards Cannon Street and St Paul's. Now we're going to go up Gracechurch Street, which, as I said, is an ancient road, and on to our right hand side we just pass Fenchurch Street, which brings you to the station. But the next place we're going to stop at is Leadenhall. And that's not all that easy to see, but just before we get to the tall buildings, Leadenhall Street, there's a turning just on your right hand side which contains glass and wrought iron. And that is Leadenhall Market. It used to be the Basilica when the Romans were in London, and that was a meeting place and an area for business. And it's been a market recorded ever since the 14th century. And it was in fact that Dick Whittington, who is one of our most famous London mayors, he actually bought the site in 1411. Now the building that you see dates back to 1881, and it was done by Horace Jones, and he built it in glass and cast iron. It's a great place to walk around and see the architecture. At the junction we have Cornhill's on our left and Leadenhall Street on our right. Now Cornhill's was famous because it was the historic centre of commerce and banking, and Thomas Gresham first set up the Royal Exchange in 1565, but this is where all the big money was made even at that time. On our right hand side there is most of the tall buildings that you see with inside London, and the ones that we have in front of us, you might not be able to see them, but there's the Gherkin, which is in 30 St Mary's Axe. There's the Inside Out building, which is the Lloyd's of London building, which is just on Leadenhall Street. Opposite that is the Cheese Grater. And further back, which we saw in Fenchurch Street, was the Walkie Talkie. And actually in this street as well, in Leadenhall Street, there is the Scalpel. The big tall building is the most recent one, which is 22 Bishopsgate. Some people think it's quite dull, so dull they haven't even thought of a name yet. But I'm sure that one will come in time. Now as we go past all these buildings, the older building that you see at the bottom of Tower 42 is where we'll be turning towards the Bank of England. Now the Bank of England started in about 1619. It happened because we had quite a disastrous confrontation with the French, and we needed to build a navy, and so in 12 days we managed to raise £1.2 million in those days, and the idea was to use that to print notes based on bonds. Proved to be very successful, and it is the 8th oldest bank in the world, and the Bank of England has been on the site that you'll see it since 1734. Now it has been upgraded in 1827 and in 1920, and if you have a look at some of the old photographs, you'll see the difference between the old and the new from the time of the 1920s. Now the Bank of England uses something called the gold standard, which was supposed to be that the amount of notes that you could print was equivalent to the amount of gold that you had. And we do keep quite a bit of gold there. There's about 400,000 bars with a value of over 200 billion even. Okay, so now opposite the Bank of England is the Royal Exchange. Now as I mentioned that Thomas Gresham built that, but he built the Royal Exchange in 1751. Now at the time when Henry VIII was around, which was just before this time, there was a lot of money floating around which he got from the church, which he managed to spend quite a bit. So when Elizabeth I was in power, there wasn't a great deal of money still left over, so the management of money was very important, and she actually opened the Royal Exchange, hence the word Royal at the front. It burnt down in 1666 and it was also destroyed in 1838, but the current building dates back from 1844. Now the area, not surprisingly, with the Bank of England is actually known as Bank, and it used to be one of the busiest centres, with everyone coming from London Bridge to work in the city. Now as we cross the road, you'll see that there's a building in front of us which is called the Mansion House, and as you see that hasn't changed very much. It's slightly older than the buildings just in this area. It actually dates back from 1752, and it is the Lord Mayor of London's official residence. So at this point we probably need to tell you some of the differences between the Lord Mayor and the Mayor of London. So the Lord Mayor of London is only in office for 1 year. He's not elected by the public or the royals or the governments. He's elected by the liveries of the city, and his main job is to look after the residents and to support the City of London. And he's also the leader of the London Corporation, who look after the City of London. Now, if you really want to do something good in November, there is the Lord Mayor Show, which takes place on the first Saturday in November. And that just has pageantry, it has carnival, and it's a great spectacle to watch. And even in the evening, they tend to have fireworks on the river. Now, as we go past the Mansion House, we'll get to a junction, and in front of us is one poultry, but we're going to take the right-hand path up into Cheapside. Now, this is an ancient market, and if you have a look at some of the names around here, we have Cheapside, we have Bank, we have Poultry. They don't have any names after them, like streets or roads. And that gives you the age of the streets. And it's also interesting to know that you'd have Milk Street and Bread Street nearby. And it was a centre where all the market used to come, and people used to sell different produce in different areas of the market, hence their names. But as you go up the street, you'll actually come across a church. And that church is St. Mary le Bow. And there was a saying that if you were a real East Ender, you would have been born within the sounds of Bow Bells, and that refers to that church. It's a bit more difficult to do these days since there's actually no maternity hospital in the vicinity, but I'm sure there'll be people who can prove me wrong. Now, in terms of the church itself, it has been there, we know, since about 1091. Now, there is an incident that happened around that time, which was the most violent tornado that's ever hit London, and that was supposed to be up to about 200 miles per hour, but it did destroy the church as well as certain other buildings in and around London. I think even affected London Bridge. The church was also destroyed in 1666, and it was badly damaged again in World War II, but the bells that do ring out actually date back to the 1950s. Now, leaving the old, and we now come to a bit of the new. This building on our left-hand side is called One New Change, and it has a nickname called Stealth Bomber, which if you go around towards the front you get more of an idea about why that is the case. And it is probably the City of London's largest shopping centre. We don't have many of them, but it is probably the biggest. It was opened in 2010 and cost about £500 million, and it was built sensitively to St. Paul's, so you don't necessarily notice it too much. You can actually go to the top. There is a open area there to get some quite interesting views towards St. Paul's and the river, and out towards the Old Bailey. And this ends this part of the run.